Get on the ground! Now, or I will drop you! It wasn't a drug bust. It wasn't a bank robbery. It was Spencer Hayes' 10th birthday party in a quiet suburb. Officer Felix Thornt thought he was just bullying a helpless family to fill his quota. He saw a black family in a big house and saw targets. He didn't know the old man watching from the porch wasn't just a grandfather. He was the man who wrote the laws Felix was breaking. One smashed cake, one terrified boy, one gun drawn. And then, one phone call that would turn the hunter into the prey. The sunlight in Oak Creek was different. It was the kind of gold that felt expensive, filtering through the ancient elms and maples that lined the pristine streets. It was the sort of neighborhood where the grass was measured in millimeters, and the silence was a commodity paid for with seven-figure mortgages. For Spencer Hayes today, the sun felt like a spotlight solely for him. 10 years old, Harrison Wells murmured, his voice a deep, gravelly rumble that vibrated in his chest. He stood by the massive stainless steel grill, flipping skewers of marinated beef with the precision of a surgeon. Double digits, Spence. That's a serious milestone. Spencer, a wiry boy with eyes that held the spark of perpetual curiosity, grinned, revealing a slightly crooked front tooth. He adjusted the collar of his new button-down shirt, trying to mimic his grandfather's stoic posture but failing as excitement caused his knees to bounce. Does it mean I can drive the Lexus now? Harrison chuckled, a rare sound that crinkled the scar near his left eye, a souvenir from a life he rarely spoke about. Let's start with the drone your mother bought you. We'll talk about the Lexus in 6 years. The backyard of the Wells estate was a sprawling sanctuary. High hedges provided privacy, enclosing a manicured lawn dotted with white folding chairs, a bouncy castle that looked like a fortress, and a long table groaning under the weight of soul food, gourmet sliders, and a massive chocolate cake topped with a sugary replica of a galaxy. Lila Rhodes, Spencer's mother and Harrison's only daughter, moved through the party like a summer breeze. In a flowing yellow sundress, she was the picture of elegance and maternal warmth. She was refilling cups of lemonade, her laughter rising above the chatter of the 20 or so children running through the sprinklers. "Dad, ease up on the smoke," Lila teased, walking past Harrison and dabbing his forehead with a napkin. "The neighbors might call the fire department." Harrison's eyes, dark and observant, scanned the perimeter of the yard. It was a habit he couldn't break, a reflex from 30 years in federal intelligence, and later, the judiciary. "Let them call," Harrison said softly, his gaze lingering for a fraction of a second on the second-story window of the house next door. He had seen the curtain twitch. "We have permits for the noise, permits for the parking, and the best brisket in the state. We're bulletproof, Lila." "Don't say that word," Lila whispered, her smile faltering for a heartbeat. "Not today." Harrison nodded somberly. He knew the anxiety that lived in her chest. Being wealthy, black, and successful in Oak Creek didn't erase the history of the world outside their gates. It often just painted a brighter target on their backs. But Harrison had spent a lifetime building walls, legal, financial, and physical, to ensure that target could never be hit. "Hey, watch this!" Spencer shouted. The boy was in the center of the lawn, holding the controller for his new drone. It was a high-end model, sleek and black with neon propellers. He pushed the throttle, and the machine zipped upward with a high-pitched whine, hovering perfectly above the bouncy castle. The other kids cheered, chasing the shadow of the drone. There was joy here, pure, unadulterated, and loud. It was the sound of freedom. Harrison watched his grandson with a fierce swelling of pride. He had retired early to ensure this specific reality. He wanted Spencer to grow up knowing he owned the ground he stood on. Harrison took a sip of his iced tea, the condensation cool against his palm. He checked his watch. 3 now p.m. The party was in full swing. At the edge of the patio, Zara Dovin, Harrison's longtime legal associate and practically a nervous system for his business affairs, tapped on her tablet. She was dressed in a sharp blazer despite the heat, her eyes scanning emails. "Judge," Zara said, not looking up, "the investments in the tech sector just matured. You're officially wealthier than you were at breakfast." "Money doesn't buy peace, Zara," Harrison replied, turning the heat down on the grill. "But it buys the lawyers who enforce it. Put it in the trust for Spencer." "Done." Zara finally looked up, smiling. "He's a good kid, Harrison. You've done well." "We've done well," Harrison corrected. "Lila did the heavy lifting. I'm just the security detail." The atmosphere was perfect. The smell of charcoal and caramelized meat mixed with the scent of cut grass. The playlist was a smooth mix of Motown classics that Harrison loved, playing at a respectful volume. It was the American dream, realized in high definition. But Harrison felt a prickle on the back of his neck. It was an instinct honed in courtrooms, where lives hung in the balance, and in interrogation rooms where lies were the only currency. The air had shifted. The birds in the high oak trees had stopped singing. He looked toward the side gate, the one that led to the driveway. The laughter of the children seemed to dampen, swallowed by a low, mechanical growl approaching from the street. It wasn't the rhythmic hum of a luxury sedan. It was the aggressive, throaty idle of a heavy-duty engine. Lila froze, a pitcher of lemonade hovering over a glass. She looked at Harrison. Her eyes widened. "Dad?" "Stay with the kids," Harrison said, his voice dropping an octave, losing all warmth. He wiped his hands on a towel and threw it onto the side of the grill. The blue and red lights didn't flash. Not yet. But the siren chirped. Whoop, whoop. A short, sharp sound designed to assert dominance. Silence fell over the backyard like a heavy blanket. The drone hovered uncertainly in the air, its buzz suddenly sounding like an annoyance rather than a wonder. Harrison stepped off the patio, moving onto the grass. He walked not like an old man, but like a tank commander surveying a breach in the line. He placed himself between the gate and the party. "Here we go," Zara muttered, closing her tablet and stepping up beside him. The latch of the gate clicked. It was thrown open with enough force that it banged against the wooden fence, chipping the paint. The uniform was crisp, tight across the chest and biceps. The badge caught the sun. But it was the face that Harrison studied. Officer Felix Thornt. He was young, perhaps early 30s, with a jaw set in arrogant stone and eyes hidden behind mirrored aviators. He didn't walk in. He invaded. Behind him trailed a younger officer, female, her hand hovering nervously near her belt. Her name tag read Hale. She looked like she wanted to be anywhere else. Felix Thornt didn't look at Harrison. He looked past him at the bouncy castle, the table of food, and the black children freezing in their tracks. He sneered. "Party's over," Thornt announced, his voice booming. "Shut it down." The silence that followed Officer Felix Thornt's command was absolute, save for the faint hum of Spencer's drone still drifting overhead. Lila was the first to move, her maternal instinct overriding her shock. She placed the pitcher down on the table with a trembling hand and walked toward the officers, smoothing her dress. "Is there a problem, officer? We're just celebrating my son's birthday." Thornt chewed a piece of gum aggressively. He finally lowered his gaze to Lila, looking her up and down with a mix of disdain and predatory boredom. "We got calls," he said, his voice flat. "Multiple complaints, noise, loitering, disturbing the peace, possible drug activity reported." "Drug activity?" Lila's voice pitched up in disbelief. "These are 10-year-olds eating cupcakes, officer, and the music is barely audible from the street." "I decide what's audible," Thornt snapped, stepping further onto the grass. His boots sank into the manicured lawn. "And right now, your attitude is the loudest thing here." Freya Hale, the rookie, shifted her weight. "Felix," she murmured, her voice barely a whisper. "It looks like a family party. Maybe we just give a warning about the volume and go." Thornt spun on her, his back to Harrison. "I didn't ask for your opinion, Boot. I said there's a disturbance. I see a disturbance." He turned back to the party, his hand resting casually yet threateningly on his baton. Harrison Wells hadn't moved. He stood like a statue, his hands clasped loosely in front of him. He was analyzing. Thornt, badge number 592, aggressive posture, dilated pupils, adrenaline or something else. He's enjoying this. Harrison knew the type. He had sentenced men like Thornt to federal prison for civil rights violations back in the 90s. But Thornt didn't see a judge. He saw an old black man in a polo shirt. "Officer," Harrison said. His voice was calm, resonant, and carried the weight of a gavel strike. "I am the homeowner. I have the permits for this gathering in my study. I can retrieve them for you. There is no need for hostility." Thornt pulled his sunglasses down the bridge of his nose, staring at Harrison with icy blue eyes. "I didn't ask for papers, Pops. I told you to shut it down. That means clear the yard. Everyone out, now." "This is private property," Zara Dovan interjected, stepping forward. "You cannot disperse a lawful gathering on private property without a warrant or probable cause of a crime in progress. I'm an attorney and—" "I don't care if you're the Queen of England," Thornt interrupted, his face reddening. He hated being challenged. "I said move." He marched forward, heading straight for the food table. "Hey!" Spencer shouted. The boy, confused and defensive of his party, ran toward the table. "Stop! That's my cake!" "Spencer, no!" Lila screamed. Thornt didn't slow down. As he passed the long table, he extended his arm and shoved the centerpiece, a heavy crystal punch bowl filled with red fruit punch. Crash. The bowl shattered on the patio stones. Red liquid splattered across the white tablecloth, looking horrifyingly like blood. The sound made the children scream. "Oops," Thornt said, a cruel smirk playing on his lips. "Trip hazard. I'm securing the scene." "You son of a—" Lila lunged forward, not to attack, but to check on the children near the glass. Thornt reacted with practiced brutality. He spun, grabbing Lila's wrist and twisting it behind her back. "Assaulting an officer! You're under arrest!" "No!" Harrison roared. The statue broke. He took 2 large strides forward. "Stay back!" Thornt yelled, his free hand dropping to the taser on his belt. "Get back, or I'll light you up, old man!" Lila cried out in pain, bent forward at the waist. "Dad, don't, please!" Freya Hale looked panicked. She reached out toward her partner. "Thornt, let her go. She didn't touch you. This is too much." "She lunged at me!" Thornt spat, tightening his grip on Lila, forcing her down to her knees in the grass. "Call for backup, Hale. Now. Code 3. Officer in distress." "Code 3? Freya stared at him. "There's no distress. It's a birthday party." "Do it!" Thornt screamed, the veins in his neck bulging. Above them, the buzzing grew louder. In the chaos, Spencer had dropped the controller. The drone, lacking input, had gone into a fail-safe hover, but as Spencer rushed to his mother, he kicked the controller. The drone dipped, swooping low near Thornt's head. Thornt flinched. He released Lila for a split second, drew his service pistol, a darkly matte Glock, and fired. Bang! The sound was deafening in the enclosed yard. The drone exploded in a shower of plastic and sparks, dropping onto the smashed cake. The children fell silent. The screaming stopped, replaced by the ringing in everyone's ears. Spencer stood frozen, staring at the smoking remains of his gift. Then he looked at the gun in the policeman's hand. The barrel was now leveled not at the drone, but generally toward the group of family members. "He has a weapon!" Thornt yelled, justifying the shot to the air, pointing at the plastic controller on the grass. Harrison Wells stopped moving. He looked at his daughter on her knees, sobbing. He looked at his grandson, shaking with trauma. He looked at the smoking gun in the hand of a man who should never have been given a badge. The fear in Harrison's chest evaporated. It was replaced by a cold, calculating fury that was far more dangerous than any weapon Thornt carried. "You have made a grave mistake, officer," Harrison said. His voice was barely a whisper, but it carried across the yard like a funeral bell. "Shut up." Thornt waved the gun wildly. "Get on the ground, all of you, face down, hands behind your heads." He began to kick the legs of the white folding chairs, toppling them. He was creating a war zone where there was none, desperate to manufacture the chaos he needed to justify his violence. "Grandpa?" Spencer whimpered. Harrison looked at Spencer. "Do as he says, Spence. Get down, slowly." Harrison lowered himself to one knee. He didn't lie flat. He kept his eyes on Thornt. "I said face down," Thornt screamed, stepping closer, the gun trembling slightly in his grip. The adrenaline was making him erratic. "Officer Hale," Harrison said, shifting his gaze to the terrified rookie. "You have a body camera. Is it on?" Freya Hale swallowed hard, her hand on her radio. She looked at the destruction, then at Harrison. She saw something in his eyes, not fear, authority. "Yes," she whispered. "It's on." "Good," Harrison said. "Remember that. You are witnessing a felony, and you are currently an accessory." "Shut your mouth!" Thornt stepped forward and kicked Harrison in the ribs. It wasn't a lethal blow, but it knocked the wind out of the 60-year-old man. Harrison groaned, falling onto his side. "Dad!" Lila screamed, trying to rise. "Stay down!" Thornt pointed the gun at Lila. Harrison coughed, tasting iron. He lay on the grass of the home he had worked 40 years to own. He felt the vibration of the earth. He felt the utter humiliation of his family, and he felt the weight of the phone in his pocket. It was time. The pain in Harrison's ribs was a sharp, hot lance, but his mind was crystal clear. It was a clarity he hadn't felt since his days prosecuting the mob in Chicago. The chaos around him, Lila's weeping, Spencer's hyperventilating breaths, the distant wail of the backup sirens Thornt had demanded, faded into background noise. Thornt was pacing now, energized by his own violence. He was shouting into his radio. "Suspect secured! Hostile crowd! Need units now!" Hostile crowd. Harrison looked at the terrified 10-year-olds huddled by the fence, clutching each other. Zara Dovin was on the ground near the patio, her phone in her hand. Thornt saw it. "Drop the phone!" Thornt lunged at her. He snatched the device from her hand and threw it against the brick wall of the house. It shattered. "No communications! Everyone is detained!" "That is evidence tampering," Zara said, her voice shaking but defiant. "It's securing the scene!" Thornt yelled back. He was sweating profusely now. Deep down, he knew he had messed up. He had fired a weapon at a toy. He had assaulted a woman. He had kicked an old man. But Felix Thornt knew how the system worked. If he made the report scary enough, if he charged them with enough felonies, the department would back him. They always did. He just needed to control the narrative until the sergeant arrived. He turned back to Harrison. The old man was shifting, reaching into his pocket. "Hands where I can see them." Thornt leveled the Glock at Harrison's head. "Don't make me do it!" Harrison stopped. He slowly pulled his hand out. He was holding a phone. It wasn't a smartphone. It was an older, encrypted satellite phone, thick and black, the kind used by government contractors in hostile territories. "Drop it," Thornt ordered. "I am making a phone call," Harrison said calmly. He didn't look at the gun. He looked Thornt in the eye. "You have detained me. You have arrested my daughter. But you have not read us our rights, and you have not charged us. I am allowed counsel." "I said, drop it!" Thornt's finger tightened on the trigger. "Felix, don't!" Freya Hale stepped in front of the gun, her back to Harrison. "He's just making a call, Felix. Put the gun away. You're going to kill someone. Move, Hale!" "No!" Freya stood her ground, trembling. "Look around you, Felix. Look at what you've done." While the partners screamed at each other, Harrison flipped the phone open. He didn't dial 911. He didn't dial a local lawyer. He pressed a single speed dial button, number 1. He put the phone to his ear. 1 ring, 2 rings. "Wells?" a voice answered. It was deep, confused, and sounded like it was coming from a room with echo. "Harrison? I haven't heard from you in 3 years. Is everything all right?" "Hello, Robert," Harrison said. His voice was steady, contrasting the absurdity of the gun pointed near his face. Robert Sterling, the Attorney General of the United States. "Harrison, I'm in a briefing with the Joint Chiefs," the Attorney General said, his tone shifting to concern. "Why are you calling the emergency line?" "I am currently lying in the dirt of my own backyard at 4200 Oak Lane," Harrison recited, staring at the mud on his expensive loafers. "I have been assaulted. My daughter has been assaulted. A weapon has been discharged in the presence of 20 minors. My grandson's birthday party has been turned into a hostage situation." "What?" Sterling's voice sharpened. "Who? Did the cartel find you?" "No, Robert. It's the local police, specifically Officer Felix Thornt, badge 592. Thornt heard his name. He stepped around Freya, looking confused. "Who are you talking to? Hang up!" Harrison ignored him. "He is currently pointing a loaded Glock 17 at me. He has destroyed property and is fabricating a riot charge." "I need you to listen to me very carefully, Robert." "I'm listening," the Attorney General said. Harrison could hear chairs scraping in the background on the other end of the line. The briefing was stopping. "If this officer pulls this trigger," Harrison said, "I want you to burn the sky down. I want the federal DOJ here. I want Civil Rights Division. I want the National Guard if you have to. But right now, I need you to get the chief of police on the line and tell him that his officer is about to execute a retired federal judge." There was a silence on the line. Then, a cold fury matched Harrison's own. "Stay on the line, Harrison. Do not hang up." Thornt kicked the phone out of Harrison's hand. It skittered across the grass, landing face up, the speakerphone still active. "I told you to hang up!" Thornt roared. "You think calling your buddy is going to help you? You're done! You're going to jail for resisting, obstructing, and assault!" From the grass, the phone's speaker crackled. The voice that came out was amplified, tinny, but unmistakably authoritative. "Officer Thornt!" The voice boomed from the small device. Thornt froze. He looked down at the phone. "This is United States Attorney General Robert Sterling," the voice said, cutting through the siren noise like a knife. "I am currently tracking this call. I have the governor on the other line. If you do not holster your weapon and step away from Harrison Wells immediately, I will have you designated as a domestic terrorist, and I will personally see to it that you never see the light of day again." Thornt blinked. The color drained from his face. "What? Who is this?" "Stand down, officer," the voice screamed. "Now!" At that moment, the sound of sirens grew deafening. But these weren't just police sirens. A black SUV with government plates tore around the corner, hopping the curb and smashing through the pristine white fence of the yard. 4 men in tactical suits jumped out, rifles raised. But they weren't aiming at Harrison. "Federal agents, drop the weapon!" Thornt spun around, bewildered. The local police backup he had called was arriving at the front, but the feds were already in the backyard. "Drop it!" Thornt's hands shook. He looked at Harrison, who was slowly pushing himself up from the ground, dusting off his knees. Harrison looked at the corrupt cop with eyes that held zero mercy. "I told you," Harrison said softly. "You made a mistake." The sheer weight of the karma about to crash down on Felix Thornt was only just beginning. The party was destroyed. The cake was ruined. But the war? The war had just started, and Harrison Wells never lost a war. The silence that descended on the backyard of 4200 Oak Lane was heavy, broken only by the synchronized clicking of safety latches disengaging on 4 Federal service rifles. Officer Felix Thornt stood in the center of a circle of tactical agents, his Glock 17 still dangling from his trembling fingers. The transition from predator to prey had been so violent, so absolute, that his brain was struggling to process the shift in reality. He blinked, sweat stinging his eyes, looking for a friendly face. He looked for the backup he had called. The local units had arrived. 2 cruisers screeched to a halt in the driveway behind the shattered gate. But the uniformed officers didn't rush in to save him. They stood by their cars, hands hovering over their weapons, frozen by the sight of the black government SUV and the men in tactical gear marked FBI, Special Threats. "Officer Thornt!" The lead agent, a man with a voice like grinding stones, stepped forward. "Drop the weapon! You have 1 second." Thornt's fingers went slack. The Glock fell, hitting the grass with a dull thud. "Hands on your head! Interlace your fingers! Drop to your knees!" "I'm a cop!" Thornt screamed, his voice cracking. "I'm on the job! This is my scene!" "You are a suspect in a federal civil rights investigation," the agent barked. He moved with blurring speed, kicking Thornt's legs out from under him. Thornt hit the ground hard, face pressing into the same dirt he had forced Harrison Wells into moments ago. But there was no dignity in Thornt's fall. He thrashed, spitting grass. "You can't do this! I have qualified immunity! Get off me!" "Immunity doesn't cover attempted murder of a federal witness," the agent hissed, zip-tying Thornt's wrists behind his back with painful tightness. "And you just threatened a former federal judge while the Attorney General was listening." Harrison Wells stood up slowly. He brushed the dirt from his knees with deliberate, slow movements. He didn't look at Thornt. He looked at his daughter. "Lila," Harrison said softly. "Check the children." Lila, shaking but driven by adrenaline, scrambled to Spencer. She pulled the boy into her arms, burying his face in her shoulder so he wouldn't see the police officer being dragged upright like a sack of grain. Freya Hale, the rookie, stood by the fence, her face pale as a sheet. She had holstered her weapon the moment the SUV crashed through the fence. She raised her hand slowly, tears streaming down her face. "I didn't shoot," she whispered to the approaching agents. "I tried to stop him. Check my body cam. Please." Harrison walked over to the lead agent. The agent nodded respectfully to him. "Judge Wells," the agent said. "Director Sterling sent us from the field office. We were 5 minutes out on a raid when the call came through. Are you injured?" "Bruised ribs," Harrison said, his voice devoid of emotion. "My daughter has a sprained wrist. My grandson is in shock. But physically, we will survive." Harrison turned his gaze to Thornt, who was being hauled toward the black SUV, not the police cruisers. "Where are you taking him?" Harrison asked. "Federal holding," the agent replied. "We're bypassing local booking. The AG wants him in federal custody immediately to prevent any administrative errors with the evidence." Thornt was screaming now, a desperate, animalistic sound. "Sergeant! Sergeant Miller! Help me! These guys are crazy!" A heavy-set sergeant from the local precinct had walked up the driveway, looking pale and sweating. He looked at the FBI agents, then at Harrison Wells, and finally at the disgraced officer screaming his name. Sergeant Miller took off his hat and wiped his forehead. He knew exactly who Harrison Wells was. He had warned the station briefing room about the Wells estate 3 years ago. Do not engage unless necessary. High-profile target. Thornt must have skipped that briefing. "I can't help you, Felix," Miller muttered, turning his back. "You coward!" Thornt screamed as he was shoved into the back of the SUV. The door slammed shut, cutting off his profanity. Harrison walked over to where his phone lay in the grass. He picked it up. The call was still active. "Robert? I heard everything." The Attorney General's voice came through, clearer now. "The governor is mobilizing the state police to take over the precinct for the next 48 hours. We're scrubbing that entire department, Harrison. But first, we need to make sure your family is safe." "We aren't leaving," Harrison said, looking at his house. "This is our home. If we leave, he wins. But I need a favor. Name it. I want the body cam footage released, Harrison said. Tonight, before the union can spin this as a tense standoff or officer fear for safety. I want the world to see him shoot a child's toy and kick an old man. That's against protocol for an ongoing investigation, Sterling hesitated. I don't care about protocol, Harrison said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. I want the court of public opinion to burn his reputation to ash before he even steps inside a courtroom. Leak it, Robert, or I will. There was a pause, then a sigh. Give me an hour. Harrison hung up. He turned to Zara, who was checking her shattered tablet. Zara, Harrison said. Already on it, Judge, she said, her eyes hard. I've drafted the civil complaint. I'm adding the city, the chief of police, and Thornt personally. I'm also contacting the media outlets. CNN is 5 minutes away. Fox is 10. Good, Harrison said. He looked at the smashed cake, the ruined party, the traumatized children. Let's get the kids inside. Then bring me my suit. Your suit? Lila asked, holding Spencer tight. Dad, you need a doctor. I need to be on the news, Harrison said, his jaw tightening. They wanted a spectacle? I'm going to give them a war. The interrogation room at the federal building was nothing like the ones Felix Thornt was used to using. It was cold, sterile, and soundproofed to a level that made the silence ringing in his ears unbearable. There was no two-way mirror, just a camera mounted in the corner with a red blinking light. Thornt sat handcuffed to the table. He had been there for 3 hours. No one had come in, no water, no phone call, just silence. He had expected his union rep, Mike Reynolds, to burst in by now, blustering about officer rights and Garrity warnings. He expected the blue wall of silence to form around him, protecting him as it had done for the other guys who got a little too rough on the night shift. The door buzzed and clicked open. Thornt straightened up, relief washing over him. About time, Mike. You gotta get me out of... He stopped. It wasn't Mike Reynolds. It was a woman in a sharp navy blue power suit holding a leather briefcase. She walked in with the confidence of an executioner. It was Zara Dovan. She didn't sit down. She placed the briefcase on the table and clicked the latches open. Who are you? Thornt sneered, though his voice wavered. I want my lawyer. Your union lawyer declined to represent you, Zara said calmly, pulling out a thick stack of documents. Something about the indefensible nature of the evidence and protecting the integrity of the union. You're on your own, Felix. Thornt felt a cold pit open in his stomach. That's a lie. We pay dues. They have to represent me. Not for federal terrorism charges, Zara corrected. She slid a document across the table. It wasn't a plea deal. It was a lawsuit. What is this? That, Zara pointed a manicured finger, is a civil suit for damages. We are suing you for assault, battery, emotional distress, violation of civil rights, destruction of property, and, my personal favorite, malicious prosecution. I don't have any money, Thornt laughed nervously. I'm a cop. Sue me all you want. The city pays. Usually, yes, Zara smiled, and it was a terrifying sight. But we are invoking a little-known clause regarding actions taken outside the scope of duty. Since you falsified the dispatch call, yes, we have the logs, there were no neighbor complaints, you were acting as a private citizen conducting an armed home invasion. The city's insurance carrier has already signaled they will deny coverage. Thornt's face went gray. What does that mean? It means... Zara leaned in close, her perfume smelling of lavender and victory. We are coming for everything. Your pension, your savings, your truck, your house. By the time Judge Wells is done with you, you won't even be able to afford the handcuffs you're wearing. Thornt slammed his fists on the table, rattling the chains. You can't do that. I was doing my job. He was resisting. Zara didn't flinch. She reached into her briefcase and pulled out a tablet. She placed it in front of him and pressed play. The video started. It wasn't from a body cam. It was high-resolution, stabilized footage. Thornt squinted. "What is that?" "Spencer's drone," Zara said. "It was recording in 4K from the moment you walked in. It uploads directly to the cloud. We have everything, Felix. We have the audio of you calling them targets. We have the video of you smiling before you smashed the punch bowl. We have the shot of you firing at a toy while children screamed." Thornt watched himself on the screen. He saw the cruelty in his own face. He saw the way he looked, not like a hero, but like a thug. "The news is airing this in 10 minutes, Zara said, checking her watch. "The narrative is set. You aren't a cop anymore, Felix. You're the villain of the week. The governor just suspended you without pay. The chief is holding a press conference to denounce you." They denounced me?" Thornt whispered. The betrayal stung more than the handcuffs. "They threw you to the wolves to save the pack," Zara said, closing the briefcase. "And we are the wolves." She turned to leave. "Wait!" Thornt yelled, panic finally setting in. "Wait! I can cut a deal. I can tell you about the sergeant. He told us to target the big houses. He said they don't belong there. I was just following orders." Zara paused at the door. She didn't turn around. "Save it for the deposition," she said. "And Felix? Happy birthday." The door slammed shut, leaving him alone with the blinking red light of the camera that was recording his confession. The dawn broke over Oak Creek, but the quiet suburb was gone. In its place was a media circus. Satellite trucks lined the streets for 3 blocks. Reporters from every major network were camped out on the sidewalk, their cameras pointed at the shattered gate of the Wells estate. But the real action was downtown at the federal courthouse. The arraignment of Felix Thornt was supposed to be a procedural formality. Usually, a cop charged with a crime would be allowed to turn himself in quietly, processed through a back door, and released on his own recognizance. Not today. Harrison Wells had made a second phone call. This one was to an old friend who ran the biggest civil rights advocacy group in the country. When the transport van carrying Thornt arrived at the courthouse, it was met by a sea of people. 5,000 protesters filled the square, chanting "Accountability" and holding signs that read, "Justice for Spencer and Badge 592, c'est criminal." Inside, the courtroom was packed to capacity. The air was thick with tension. Harrison Wells sat in the front row, wearing a charcoal 3-piece suit that cost more than Thornt's annual salary. His ribs were taped, and he moved stiffly, but his posture was regal. Next to him sat Lila, looking poised and angry, and Zara, who had a laptop open, live blogging the proceedings. When the bailiff announced, "All rise," the room stood. The presiding judge was Judge Marcus Holloway. Harrison knew him. They had clashed in the past, Holloway being a staunch conservative who usually leaned heavily toward law enforcement. Thornt was led in. He looked broken. He was wearing an orange federal jumpsuit, stripped of his uniform, his dignity, and his aviators. He scanned the room, seeing the hostile faces. He looked at the prosecutor's table. The U.S. attorney, a sharp woman named Eleanor Vance, stood up. "Your Honor," Vance began, her voice cutting through the murmurs, "the government moves to deny bail." Thornt's public defender, a young, overworked lawyer who clearly hadn't had time to prep, jumped up. "Objection! Your Honor, Mr. Thornt is a decorated officer with deep ties to the community. He is not a flight risk. Denial of bail is excessive." Judge Holloway looked over his glasses at Thornt. Then he looked at Harrison Wells in the front row. Holloway nodded slightly. "Ms. Vance," Holloway said, "state your grounds." "Your Honor," Vance said, holding up a flash drive, "the defendant is charged with deprivation of rights under color of law, attempted aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, and witness tampering. Furthermore, we have evidence that immediately following the incident, the defendant attempted to coerce a subordinate officer, Officer Freya Hale, into falsifying a report. That makes him a danger to witnesses and the obstruction of justice." "Lies!" Thornt shouted from the defense table. "Hale is a traitor! Order!" Holloway banged his gavel. "One more outburst, Mr. Thornt, and I will have you gagged." Vance continued. "The government also presents into evidence the 911 dispatch logs. There were no calls complaining about the party. The defendant called the dispatch himself using a burner phone to create a pretext for the raid. This was premeditated harassment." The courtroom gasped. Even the press in the back row typed furiously. "Premeditated," Holloway repeated, writing it down. "Yes, Your Honor. And given the defendant's unstable behavior and the overwhelming video evidence, which has now been viewed 40 million times globally," Vance paused for effect, "we believe he is a danger to the community." Thornt's lawyer tried again. "Your Honor, 40 million views? This is a trial by media. My client cannot get a fair hearing if he is kept in jail because of a YouTube video." Judge Holloway leaned forward. "Counselor, your client isn't in this courtroom because of a YouTube video. He is here because he fired a service weapon at a child's birthday party. I have watched the footage. It is chilling." Holloway turned to Thornt. "Felix Thornt, the court finds that the weight of the evidence against you is substantial. The court also finds that your actions display a shocking disregard for public safety and the law you were sworn to uphold. Bail is denied. You are remanded to federal custody until trial." The gavel banged. It sounded like a gunshot. "No!" Thornt screamed as the marshals grabbed him. "You can't do this! I'm a cop! I'm one of the good guys!" As they dragged him out, he locked eyes with Harrison Wells. Harrison didn't smile. He didn't smirk. He simply raised one hand and tapped his wrist as if checking the time. "Your time is up." Thornt was hauled through the side door, his screams echoing in the hallway. Outside on the courthouse steps, Harrison faced the bank of microphones. The cameras flashed, a blinding stroboscope. "Judge Wells!" a reporter from CNN shouted. "Do you feel justice was served today?" Harrison leaned into the microphones. The crowd went silent. "Justice is not a single act," Harrison said, his voice booming without a megaphone. "Justice is a habit. Today we saw the beginning of accountability. But Officer Thornt was not a rogue actor. He was a symptom of a disease. He felt comfortable terrorizing my family because the system told him he could." He looked directly into the camera lens. "We are not done. We are coming for the precinct. We are coming for the policies that allowed this. And to anyone else who thinks a badge is a shield for bigotry..." Harrison paused, letting the silence hang heavy. "We are watching, and we have the resources to fight back." The crowd erupted in cheers, but Harrison didn't stay for the applause. He turned and walked toward his car, Zara and Lila flanking him. "What now, Dad?" Lila asked as they got into the limousine. Harrison looked out the window at the city he had served for decades. "Now," he said, "we find out who gave the order. Thornt mentioned a Sergeant Miller, and I want to know why the house next to ours had a twitching curtain right before the police arrived." The twist wasn't over. Thornt was just the pawn. The king was still on the board. The war against Felix Thornt was public, loud, and televised, but Harrison Wells knew that weeds, if not pulled by the root, would simply grow back. Thornt was the blade, but someone else had guided the hand. 3 days after the incident, while the media vans were still camped out on the street, Harrison walked out of his front door. He didn't head toward the cameras. He walked across his manicured lawn to the property line that separated his estate from the colonial mansion next door. The neighbor, Arthur Pym, was a man who had made his fortune in pharmaceuticals, a man who smiled at neighborhood block parties but never quite made eye contact. He was currently standing on his porch, aggressively watering a bed of petunias, pretending not to notice the 6'2" former judge approaching him. "Good morning, Arthur," Harrison said. His voice was pleasant, but it didn't reach his eyes. Pym startled, spraying water onto his own loafers. "Oh, Harrison, quite a show you've got going on over there. Terrible business with that officer. Just terrible." Yes, Harrison agreed. Leaning against the white picket fence Pym had installed the week Harrison bought the house. It's fascinating, though. My legal team pulled Officer Thornton's personal phone records this morning. Pym's hand froze. The stream of water trickled onto the concrete. Phone records? Why would I care about that? Because, Harrison continued, unlatching the gate and stepping into Pym's yard uninvited. Felix Thornton didn't receive a dispatch call from 911. He received a personal call on his burner cell, 7 minutes before he raided my backyard. Harrison stopped 2 feet from Pym. He towered over the smaller man. The call came from your number, Arthur. Pym's face flushed a deep, blotchy red. He dropped the hose. Now see here, Harrison. I was concerned. The noise. The music. It was thump, thump, thump all afternoon. I have a right to peace and quiet. It was 3 p.m. on a Saturday, Harrison said coldly, and the decibel level was well below the legal limit. We measured it. It wasn't about the noise, Pym snapped, his facade cracking under Harrison's intense gaze. It's the crowd. You people move in here, and suddenly it's 50 people in the yard, loud cars, loud music. It doesn't look like Oak Creek anymore. I called Felix because he told me to let him know if things got out of hand. I just wanted him to quiet you down. You wanted him to put us in our place, Harrison corrected. You saw a black boy celebrating his birthday in a house bigger than yours, and it ate you alive, didn't it? Pym scoffed, trying to regain his composure. You can't prove intent. I made a noise complaint. That's not a crime. Actually, Harrison smiled, a shark-like expression that terrified Pym. Soliciting a public official to commit harassment is a crime. Conspiring to violate civil rights is a federal crime. And since you called his personal number, you are now a co-conspirator in the federal indictment against Felix Thornton. Pym went pale. You wouldn't. Zara is filing the paperwork as we speak, Harrison said, checking his watch. But I'm not just coming for your freedom, Arthur. I'm coming for your comfort. What do you mean? I sit on the board of the bank that holds your commercial loans for your factory, Harrison said softly. And I sit on the ethics committee for the Pharmaceutical Trade Association. By tomorrow morning, your loans will be called in for review due to reputational risk, and your license to trade will be suspended pending a moral turpitude investigation. Pym trembled, backing up until he hit his front door. Harrison, please. It was just a phone call. I didn't know he would shoot. You wound the clock, Harrison said, turning his back on the neighbor. You don't get to blame the gears for turning. Harrison walked away as Pym collapsed onto his porch chair, head in his hands. The curtain would never twitch again. The house next door would be for sale within the month. 6 months later, the federal courthouse was even more crowded than it had been for the arraignment. The trial of United States versus Felix Thornton had captivated the nation. It wasn't just a trial about a ruined birthday party. It had become a referendum on the unchecked power of the badge. Officer Felix Thornton sat at the defense table, but he was a shadow of the arrogant man who had stomped onto the Wells estate. He had lost 30 pounds. His hair was thinning. He wore a cheap suit provided by the public defender because Zara Dovin's asset seizure had frozen every bank account he and his wife owned. His wife had left him 2 months ago, taking the truck and the dog. The prosecution had been ruthless. They didn't just use the drone footage. They brought in Freya Hale. Freya had resigned from the force a week after the incident. She took the stand not as a cop, but as a witness. She wept as she described Thornton's excitement in the car, the way he had bragged about bagging a big one when Pym called him. She detailed the culture of intimidation Thornton fostered, the way he targeted minority neighborhoods to pad his arrest stats. Her testimony was the nail in the coffin. Now, the jury was back. All rise. Harrison Wells sat in the front row, his hand resting firmly on Spencer's shoulder. Spencer was 11 now. He was taller, quieter, but he was there. Harrison insisted he see this. He needed to see that monsters could be slain. Judge Holloway looked at the jury foreman. Have you reached a verdict? We have, Your Honor. Thornt stood up, his knees shaking. He looked back at the gallery, hoping for someone, anyone, to be there for him. The seats behind him were empty. The police union had abandoned him completely. On count 1, deprivation of rights under color of law, the foreman read. We find the defendant, Felix Thornt, guilty. A collective breath was released in the room. On count 2, aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, guilty. On count 3, conspiracy to violate civil rights, guilty. Thornt closed his eyes. Tears leaked out, running down his face. On count 4, witness tampering, guilty. Judge Holloway didn't wait for sentencing. He looked at Thornt with undisguised disgust. Felix Thornt, the judge said, his voice echoing in the silent room. You were given a position of trust. You were given a weapon and a badge to protect the vulnerable. Instead, you used them to terrorize a child and a grandfather because of their race and your own ego. You are a disgrace to the uniform you once wore. Thornt sobbed openly now. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. The time for sorrow was when you pulled that trigger, Holloway said. I am sentencing you to the maximum penalty allowed under federal guidelines. You are sentenced to 25 years in federal prison without the possibility of parole. You will be stripped of your pension, and you are barred for life from holding any public office or security position. The gavel banged. 25 years. Thornt's legs gave out. The marshals had to hold him up. As they dragged him away, he looked at Harrison one last time. Harrison didn't look away. He didn't gloat. He simply nodded, a final acknowledgement of a transaction completed. The debt was paid. Is it over, Grandpa? Spencer asked softly. Harrison looked at the boy. The trial is over, Spence, but the work is never over. But tonight we celebrate. 1 year to the day of the incident, the backyard of 4200 Oak Lane was transformed once again. But this time, it wasn't just a birthday party. It was a block party. The hedges were trimmed, the lawn was immaculate, and the bouncy castle was back, bigger this time, looking like a dragon. But the crowd was different. It wasn't just friends and family, it was the community. Harrison had used the settlement money, a staggering $12 million payout from the city and Pym's insurance carrier, to launch the Spencer Hayes Foundation for Legal Justice. The foundation provided free legal defense for victims of police misconduct and funded drone technology camps for inner-city youth. Spencer stood in the center of the yard. He was 12 today. He held a new controller in his hands. "Ready, Spence?" Lila asked. She looked radiant, her wrist fully healed, her smile brighter than it had been in years. She was now the executive director of the foundation. "Ready," Spencer said. He pushed the throttle. A fleet of 20 drones rose into the air in perfect formation. They buzzed upward, their lights synchronizing to form a shape in the twilight sky. A heart. Then, a scales of justice. The crowd cheered. Neighbors from all over Oak Creek, even the ones who had been hesitant before, clapped. The toxicity that Pym and Thornt had tried to inject into the neighborhood had been flushed out, replaced by a fierce solidarity. Harrison stood by the grill, just like before. But this time, he wasn't alone. Freya Hale stood next to him, holding a plate of barbecue. She was studying law now, her tuition paid for by Harrison's scholarship fund. "You flip a mean burger, Mr. Wells," Freya said, smiling tentatively. "It's Judge Wells," Harrison corrected gently, winking. "But for you, Freya, you can call me Harrison. You stood up when it mattered." "I should have done more," she said, watching the drones. "You did enough to end it," Harrison said. "That's more than most." Zara Dovan walked up, holding a tablet, old habits dying hard. "Judge, the news just broke. Pym's house sold. A nice young couple bought it, mixed race, doctors." Harrison laughed, a deep belly-shaking sound that felt like victory. "Karma has a sense of humor, Zara." "And Thornt?" Zara asked quietly. Processed into maximum security at Leavenworth yesterday, Harrison said, his face sobering. He's in protective custody. General population didn't take kindly to a cop who shoots at kids. Justice served, Zara nodded. Harrison looked out at his grandson. Spencer was laughing, his head tilted back, watching his drones dance in the gold and purple sky. He wasn't the traumatized victim anymore. He was the pilot. He was in control. The fear that Thornt had tried to plant in the boy's heart hadn't taken root. Instead, something stronger had grown. Harrison took a sip of his iced tea. The air was sweet. The birds were singing. And for the first time in a long time, the sirens were silent. "Happy birthday, Spencer," Harrison whispered to the wind. "Drive the Lexus whenever you want." The story of Spencer Hayes is not just a story about a ruined party. It is a reminder that power, when unchecked, becomes tyranny. But it is also a testament to the fact that tyranny, no matter how armed or arrogant, cannot stand against the truth. Officer Felix Thornt thought his badge made him a god. He thought he could crush a family because of how they looked. He learned, in the hardest way possible, that the law is not a sword for the cruel. It is a shield for the righteous. Harrison Wells didn't just win a lawsuit. He dismantled a system of oppression in his own backyard. He proved that one phone call, made by the right man at the right time, can bring the walls of injustice crumbling down. Karma didn't just hit back. It struck with the precision of a gavel. They tried to break a family. Instead, they built a legacy. If this story fired you up, if you believe that justice should be blind and that bad actors need to be held accountable, smash that like button right now. It helps us get these stories out to more people. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you never miss a story of karma, justice, and redemption. Share this video with someone who needs to be reminded that the good guys can still win.